Give us trouble and the trouble will be yours. That was Iranian President Rouhanis' message to the United States. The US had threatened to stop 5 Iranian oil tankers en route to Venezuela. But the 60 million ton flotilla continued across the Caribbean and got over 1.5 million barrels of gasoline and alkylate safely to Venezuelan shores within 10 days, between late May and early June. Iran has stressed it will not start a conflict. However, it will respond in kind if attacked. It's still fresh in memory, the assassination of General Soleimani right after New Year 2020 and Iran's retaliation to that act of terror when it showered missiles on major US bases in Iraq. And the US is not short of military bases in West Asia, nor of vessels transiting the Persian Gulf. What is it they say of people in glass houses? Hi, I'm Leila Farabarzi and you're watching Iran Today. Stay with me to see how a petrol shipment to Venezuela can have been much more, culturally speaking. Talking of reciprocating in kind, there was another incident last year. Mr. Zulfaqari bears the example. He is editor-in-chief at Hispan TV.
در مورد نفتکش‌ها جالبه که خب ما قضیه
As far as the Venezuela-bound oil tankers are concerned, we had the Gray Swan case in Gibraltar. The Gray Swan was seized for some time by Gibraltar, whose government is controlled directly by the British government. That is the US's top political, strategic and economic ally in the world. However, in Britain-controlled Gibraltar, government failed to produce any evidence for the seizure of the Gray Swan. Even the European Union was opposed to the Gray Swan seizure, and the tanker was released. Although the US threatened to repeat the Gray Swan scenario, regarding the 5 Iranian tankers destined to Venezuela, it failed in practice to find any strategy.
Iran took every legal precaution this time round with the shipment to Venezuela. It left all 5 Iranian-flagged vessels' GPS systems on and paid no heed to bullying. I asked what this showed. Ms. Fallahi has embarked on a new political career, having won a seat in Iran's recently convened parliament. She comments. The US threatened action, Iran reciprocated in kind and continued its path till the tankers reached Venezuela. What does this show?
What
matters is that since the Americans have violated international law on many occasions, we have knowingly stepped into their backyard. What's important is that we have assumed this risk. We were assured that we could respond to any possible problem. The Americans knew quite well that we would threaten their interests in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. We had sent them a message that should they do any wrong move, we would endanger their interests in the entire region, even on US territory. The Americans feared as they took Iran's threat seriously. That is a turning point.
I said Iran took every legal precaution. If so, US threats must have been out of line with international law. Let's hear more from our guest. Do analyze, from a standpoint of international law, the threats US keeps on making against Iran's tankers in open waters.
If we say risk, it's because the Americans are flouting international law. Otherwise, we have not taken any step against international norms and conventions. International maritime law barred the Americans from boarding any vessels. Therefore, our move was within the framework of freedom of navigation in high seas. We respected all requirements. Based on international regulations, you can board and seize a vessel when it is headed towards slavery, or it has unknown nationality, or it is carrying pirates, or it can emit illegal radio waves, or it is armed, or it violates territorial integrity of nations passing by to threaten their security. We were in full compliance with international law. Articles 87 and 97 of International Maritime Law give all nations the right to free navigation.
The US is ready to recognize that under international law and maritime law, free trade and free transit are protected. But it wields the argument against China when US vessels need to freely navigate the South China Sea, forgetting everyone is equal in the eyes of the law. Mr. Vahidzadeh is an Iran Latin America expert and writer on current affairs. He's most definitely worth lending an ear to, so let's have a listen. The fact that Iran breached US threats and got to Venezuela, would you say it's a breakthrough in the history of US sanctions and that we found a way to bypass those oil sanctions?
Yeah, that was it. And also, I think that there was a genius point that these two countries used in this matter. Because the United States is claiming that it is in favor of the free shipping in the world. So, and the first rulings that the United States talked about in the Chicago Convention and also in the Jamaica Convention was the free shipment and the free trading in the oceans. So if somehow United States wanted to capture the tankers or somehow not letting them to go, it would be against its principles, although we have seen that Mr. Trump is going against many of the principles of United States, but it is one of the first and foremost for them.
The Iran-Venezuela alliance must infuriate the Trump administration. Both oil-rich OPEC countries are under US sanctions, which is why Venezuela is starved of gasoline. Not only have they long forged an anti-US imperialist union with Iran, they are now trading oil and gas with this country. This bears the question, why does Iran support countries so distant? US sanctions don't just target Iran, but anyone who buys or facilitates the purchase of Iranian oil products beginning 2018. The Venezuelan oil company shares a similar plight as the Trump administration has moved to enforce the Monroe Doctrine. That's a 19th century policy that rejects foreign interference in the Western Hemisphere. Rather, it targets any deal hampering US interests in its vicinity.
Well, the similarities we can point to the section that is on the oil. The oil section is the primitive objective of Mr. Trump to cripple Iran and Venezuela both by exporting, by also extracting oil from their territories. Nevertheless, Iran has the power to extract, but Venezuela have been crippled in that matter. So in the recent days, we saw that Iran sent support for this objective to Venezuela to somehow gain get it back to its feet to continue in its oil revenues and its oil extractions. So the similarity I can say that is in the oil sector. Also, the differences is that in Iran we had a nuclear accord with US, but Mr. Trump left that. And in Venezuela there wasn't an accord. Simply they were the first client to US by their oil and by the gasoline. But Trump, because he wants to cripple these countries in order to have his say in the politics that he wants to get forward, is going for the sanctions.
This way, Venezuela's Maduro government, that has inherited its anti-US imperialist policy from its late President Chavez, will take a blow, which is why deepening ties with Iran is now so important to Venezuela, as it is to Iran to extend its reach across the globe with the prospect of a new center of influence just across the Caribbean Sea from Florida. Just a quick note more, the US supports the opposition leader Juan Guaido as Venezuela's legitimate leader. The energy crisis in Venezuela is so dire that its nation have had to watch agricultural products getting destroyed and patients never making it to hospital. Now the new Iranian flotilla arriving has brought new hope, but the state has had to up petrol prices to make up for deficit.
یه پروسه حدود شاید 10 روز تا این 5 تا نفتکش
The 5 tankers arrived in Venezuela following a 10-day procedure until they arrived at their port and refinery destinations to unload their cargo. Venezuela quickly started distributing the fuel supplied by Iran. Venezuela adopted new mechanisms for distributing and pricing. Until recently, Venezuela was distributing approximately free gasoline among citizens. But now, due to economic problems caused by US sanctions, Venezuela has set combined prices in both dollars and bolivar. Venezuela is now distributing both subsidized and unsubsidized fuel. However, Venezuela is distributing gasoline at lowest prices in the world.
I said Islamic Iran and Socialist Venezuela ironically share a worldview. Well, their reaction to the US's latest bullying has also been pretty aligned. As the first of 5 Iranian oil tankers neared their destination on May the 24th, a Navy ship and aircraft set out to escort it. President Nicolas Maduro's government had pledged to protect the tankers as they reached Venezuela's exclusive economic zone. The El Palito refinery in Portocabelo in northern Carabobo state was to get up and running again, but this would come at a price for the average Venezuelan, given raised petrol prices.
ونزوئلا با توجه به اینکه تحریم سنگینی رو متحمل شده
Venezuela has endured tough sanctions, particularly in the oil sector. Venezuela is geographically close to the U.S. The U.S. was a main buyer of Venezuelan oil. This trend was underway under the administration of Mr. Chavez and Mr. Maduro, both anti-imperialist heads of state. However, after the U.S. imposed sanctions on refinery equipment, Venezuela, a major oil producer in the world, ran into problems with oil production. As a result of these sanctions, Venezuela's gasoline exports reached zero, and its oil production and exports were slashed. Iran benefited from this opportunity to both show its goodwill and prove its strategic capacity to the U.S. Iran was sending this message that it would be even able to aid any country in the U.S. backyard. Iran helped Venezuela under conditions where no South American nation, including Brazil, that were able to provide assistance to Venezuela did not do so.
Time for a short break. We'll be back in no time. To create a multipolar world and breaking U.S. hegemony, Venezuela and Iran forged the South-South cooperation. That's a technical cooperation among developing countries in the global South to share skills and resources. To dip back in time and how it all started, first I give you a break for a look at current affairs on other media outlets. For that, Shahrzad is here.
Hi, my name is Shahrzad Manucheri, and this is a new section of Iran Today. We'll be looking online for the latest update on Iran's ties with Venezuela amid U.S. sanctions. In an article by Tehran Times, we witnessed California University professors saying fuel delivery to Venezuela is Iran's right. Ronnie Lipschutz, a professor at the University of California, has said that Iran and Venezuela are independent countries and that Tehran has the right to ship fuel to Venezuela. The two countries have the right to send and receive fuel, and the only way for the United States to prevent shipments is to directly intervene by using its navy, which will be considered an act of war, Lipschutz told in an interview. Tehran's decision to send Iran-flagged tankers to Venezuela amid U.S. sanctions against both countries has infuriated those in the White House. Carlos Antonio Alcala Cardonez, the Venezuelan ambassador to Iran, told the Tehran Times in an interview that Iran has demonstrated its geopolitical power and its ability to defy U.S. hegemony by sending fuel tankers to blockaded Venezuela. Business Times reports that U.S. weighs backlisting dozens more oil tankers over Venezuela. The United States is considering imposing sanctions on dozens of additional foreign oil tankers for trading with Venezuela, U.S. officials told Reuters on Friday, the latest effort to sever what Washington sees as a lifeline for President Nicolas Maduro. Some sanctions could be announced in the near term, while others could be imposed over a longer period if the trading activity persists in violation of U.S. restrictions, one of the officials said on condition of anonymity. Vessels that can be targeted include 25 supertankers, which can each carry a maximum of 2 million barrels of oil, and 17 smaller vessels, the sources said. Mer News takes a look into capital of Iran, Venezuela, binational banks increase. The capital of Iran, Venezuela, binational bank will increase by $66.7 million. Saeed Mustashar, an official at Monetary and Banking Research Center, made the remarks and said the bank has started as a joint venture between two state-owned banks, Banco Industrial de Venezuela and Export Development Bank of Iran, with a starting capital of $200 million offered equally by both parties. Since the joint Bank of Iran and Venezuela has been licensed by the Central Bank of Iran, CBI, in reals and foreign exchange fields, the bank has been active in various areas, including offering loan and facilities, reals and foreign exchange-based commitments, currency transfer, remittances, etc., he said, adding the bank has experienced a considerable growth since its establishment. That's all for this segment. We'll see you next week.
Iran's relationship with Venezuela goes back to 1960, no less. Both countries were founding members of OPEC. After Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran also developed close ties with Cuba and Nicaragua. In doing so, it had forged an anti-US alliance, which was totally aligned with a revolution that had deposed its pro-US monarchy. With the election of Hugo Chavez in 1998, Venezuela opened its doors to cooperation in all fields with Iran. It also brokered alliances between Iran and Bolivia's President Evo Morales and Ecuador's President Rafael Correa. Iran and Venezuela have signed some 300 agreements between themselves. More recently, in a meeting with Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arasa in Tehran, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said Iran and Venezuela can expand their relations and cooperation in all fields, including mining, energy, power plant construction, and scientific and technological cooperation. It was then that he expressed readiness to hold a joint commission for cooperation between the two countries. Former Presidents Ahmadinejad and Chavez of Iran and Venezuela formed a unity axis against American imperialism. In January of 2007, they even agreed to use $2 billion of joint ventures to help countries that want to break away from the yoke of imperialism. Before that, the fifth Iranian President Khatami had made 3 visits to Venezuela, one time in March 2005, when Chavez awarded him the Orden del Libertador, the Order of the Liberator, and called him a tireless fighter for all the right causes in the world. In May 2006, Chavez even expressed his support for Iran's nuclear program, confirming Iran had no intention of developing nuclear weapons.
After all, Iran and Venezuela are both revisionists, rejecting the US-imposed world order. We have both embraced revolutionary ideals and we want to be independent. We don't want to become the backyard of world powers. Although we are geographically distant and we differ culturally, what we have in common is that we are both subject to US-led global injustice. Our solution is to stand alongside each other. We also share energy interests, as we are both rich in energy, while all doors to economic transactions have been closed to us. We have to try our best to open these doors for each other.
I talked of the $2 billion joint fund. Now, in the same year, that's 2007, but in July, that Iran and Venezuela declared an axis of unity. It was later, in 2009, during the G20 London summit, that Chavez and Ahmadinejad held their own meeting, the G2 summit, as they called it, at which the formation of a joint Iranian-Venezuelan development bank was announced. The bank's initial capital was set at $200 million. Hugo Chavez visited Iran after, in 2010, when he condemned military attack threats against Iran by some countries. Chavez enforced ties with Iran mostly in economic and industrial cooperation and energy production. His first trip to Iran was in 2001 when he said he was on a mission for peace and stability, justice and progress in the 21st century. The Iranian president of the time, Mohammad Khatami, also traveled to Venezuela in his time as president 3 times.
Venezuela and other Latin American countries are supporting Iran in many different issues such as nuclear program, and also they are against the sanctions that were imposed by UN back before the nuclear agreement, and also they are against of the unilateral sanctions imposed by United States. Chavez was in great relationship with Iran, that even he was able to put aside relationships with Israel, and also he wasn't very in favor of the policies of United States toward Iran and other Latin American countries.
It was former US President Barack Obama who in May 2011 imposed sanctions on Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA. That was for defying US law and sending Iran 2 tankers of an oil product. President Ahmadinejad in September 2011 had already signed cooperation deals on manufacturing, energy, construction and agriculture during talks in Caracas.
قطعاً اقتصاد جدای از مناسبات دیپلماتیک.
Economy is not separate from diplomacy. When diplomatic ties expand, one of its aspects could be economic cooperation. Iran's role has been much more effective because Iran is a larger nation with more diverse resources. Unlike Venezuela, whose strong point is only energy and mine deposits. Iran has agricultural and industrial advantages as well. From 2006 to 2008, Iran and Venezuela saw a boom in their economic cooperation. We established car manufacturing sites and food products plants there. We helped Venezuela's agriculture sector, and we even had construction projects.
2013 was a far cry from birthdays. It was the year of Chavez's death. At the time, as of March 10, 2013, annual bilateral trade between the 2 countries, Iran and Venezuela, was estimated at hundreds of millions of US dollars. It was also when Nicolas Maduro became interim president. Today, as president, he has yet deeper ties with Iran in following in the footsteps of Chavez. Relations between Iran and Venezuela have been steadily on the rise. Trade relations have begun and been furthered in various fields such as agriculture and energy, housing, construction and infrastructure. But it's more than trade. Chavez's Bolivarianism had a goal, which was creating an ideological basin stretched from the Caribbean Sea to the Persian Gulf.
In the political arena, everyone embraces coalitions serving their interests the most. Since we are under sanctions that have existed since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the sanctions were unilateral and imposed by the US, but they became multilateral after other countries and even the UN joined. One important issue in our international relations is to be able to leave behind these sanctions. Therefore, we seek alliance with nations whose interests we share. One reason why we have chosen Venezuela is that we are both under US sanctions.
If Venezuela makes a new request even for fuel shipments, new shipments will be sent. Iran deems it a natural right to defend its interests even in faraway places, said Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Mousavi. On May the 17th, 2020, as a matter of fact, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif sent a letter to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. In it, he warned the US about sending troops with the aim of interfering with the transfer of Iran's fuel to Venezuela. Because, to repeat, unilateral sanctions, such as US sanctions on Iran and Venezuela, which are not imposed by the United Nations Security Council, are not legally binding by international or maritime law. To impose unilateral sanctions on another country and to enforce them by military means is seen as an act of war. That's it for today. Thanks for watching from the whole team. Do watch again at the same times next week and each week after, as you never know what's on. And don't forget to leave your comments and topic requests. Bye for now.